Hello out there. My name is Kenneth M. Price Jr. I'm going to attempt to give you the truth about the Titanic and also the Hindenburg. First off, concerning the Titanic, there's something very wrong with the existing story of the Titanic. In fact, that story has changed many times. I'm not sure if you're aware that since 1985, when the hull was found in two pieces, that the story has had to undergo a number of modifications. So I mentioned in the title of the video that the Titanic is in 5 pieces. One of those pieces is at the Luxor Hotel in Las Vegas, is known as the Big Piece. The other 2 pieces are the fore and aft sections of the main hull. Now we're up to 3 pieces. Now there's 2 more major pieces. Where are they from? They're from just aft of midships, from the very bottom of the hull. What? From the very bottom of the hull? How is that possible? Well, that's what we're gonna that's what we're gonna explain here. We're gonna try and explain it anyway. But I want you to know that that has changed completely the way that the Titanic was originally described, as sinking and slipping straight down beneath the waves intact. And it wasn't until 1985, after the Ballard expedition discovered that the hull was in 2 major pieces, that a revision of all this started to take place. And that was because they needed an explanation. Now, the 2 of the massive pieces, well, I said 5 pieces, 2 of these pieces came from the very bottom of the ship, just aft of midships. And as it turns out, they're right from beneath the engines. And as it also turns out, these pieces had to be cut through 2 layers of steel. So this is where I'm going to lose some of the learned Titanic researchers, because I know that they're going to claim that, hey, look, we know everything about the Titanic that we need to know. I mean, and they do. They know all the china and pewter and everything that was on that ship, the artwork, who was on it, and what they were into. But my fellow friends, if I made this claim without my total confidence being that I'm absolutely correct, what would that make me? That would make me the most unlearned, uneducated, inexperienced, and make me arrogant. And it also make me look like I'm maybe insane. Well, I hope I don't look insane to you. And I want you to know that's not my purpose. My purpose is to get the truth of the Titanic out. And it turns out there's a very good reason for this. There's a good reason to review what actually happened to the Titanic. Because we're on the verge of a transportation renaissance in this country. And if we wise up, we'll rebuild our transportation system the way it should have been built the first time. But if we let them just keep these things covered up, we're going to end up rebuilding the same junk all over again. Now, I've got plenty of information on this existing transportation system in the form of 2 books. One book, the first book, is called The Rise and Fall of the Piston Engine. I outline everything in there that the oil industry has done to steer us into piston-powered automobiles, planes. Well, now we have jets, but piston-powered marine applications. You know, we've got pistons even in power plants still, piston engines, if you can believe such a thing. Well, so from here, we go on to a much bigger picture that the Titanic is part of, because as it turns out, the Titanic was a very fuel efficient form of transportation. In fact, the Titanic could sail across the Atlantic Ocean on 3,000 tons of coal. I know that might sound like a lot, but if you're carrying 3,000 passengers, then it takes 1 ton of coal per passengers. And that's with a cabin and a room and heated water and lobster and everything else. A ton of coal. It's heating the ship, moving it at 22 knots. And in 1912, the commercial price of coal was $1 a ton. Those 3,000 people could move across the ocean on $3,000. That's $1 per person. How's that for efficiency? Not to mention, you didn't need to process this fuel. All you had to do was scoop it out of the ground. You didn't need tanks for it. It didn't leak. You didn't need pipelines. And look what we've got now. Okay. I'll touch on the Hindenburg for a second. The Hindenburg was a form of anti-gravity right in front of our eyes. You could get 500,000 pounds of weight off the ground just by releasing a mooring line. Okay, all the engines had to do was push. And what were they pushing? They were pushing a long, elongated tube with a very pointed end. Very streamlined. All they had to do is push it. And guess what? The Hindenburg had diesel engines. Well, as I outlined in The Rise and Fall of the Piston Engine, diesel engines are about 2 times as efficient as gasoline or aviation fuel engines because they run a much higher compression ratio, and they can also run on the lean side. So the Hindenburg employed a much more fuel efficient type engine, plus that engine only needed to move it forward. And if you compare the horsepower of the Hindenburg to a B-17 bomber per weight, the B-17 bomber has about 8 times the amount of horsepower. Excuse me. Now, it does go a little faster. It went to its target at about 160 knots. The Hindenburg went 85 knots. Okay, but it only had 1/7 or 1/8 of the power. So let's not label the Hindenburg as a real dog yet. Actually, it was extremely efficient at for having such a small amount of horsepower. And let us not forget that we've had other ships like the Lusitania and the Maine. These ships were very definitely blown up. Ships get blown up. What am I getting at? The Titanic was blown up. It's time to consider that because the Titanic could not have separated itself into 5 major pieces in the act of sinking. And that's what the story asks us to believe. When a ship is brought into dry dock, it's brought in, floating on water, and they let that water out, and the ship comes down on blocks. And if we did the same thing to the Titanic, we could lower that ship down on a block at the bow and one at the stern. The ship wouldn't break when you let all the water out. And if that ship is floating on water, which is evenly distributed across the whole bottom of the boat, and as it's filling with water, it's even more evenly distributed. The forces are much lower than if it was just setting on 2 sawhorses, so to speak. It wouldn't break. The ocean was calm. The seas were flat. It wasn't being bashed up against a solid cliff. It wasn't being bashed on the bottom. It wasn't aground on a reef. But it ended up on the bottom in 5 pieces. This needs a thorough discussion, and that's what I'm here for. So we're going to proceed from here with a number of videos to more graphically describe what I'm talking about.